Thank you and welcome everyone. As always, my name is Samuel Kamochu, and I'll be taking you through the second section on web and HTTP 101. But before I do so, I'd like to just do a quick recap, just in case someone has forgotten what we discussed yesterday. Yesterday we talked about the web, and we said that web is a collection of files, HTML files, which are used to define the HTML elements that make up your website, CSS that is able to define how the website looks like. We have JavaScript that adds excitement to the website or the web app. So through JavaScript, we are able to now have interactive websites, and we can connect with other things. So we also have images, we have CSVs, we talked about PDFs, and many other files that make up the websites or the web apps. So web pages, web resources, they are all put together and they form what we call a website. We say that these files have to be transferred onto a server, and this server is called a web server. And of course, to transfer the file, the most crude way is to do FTP or SFTP, or you do SCP like we did yesterday. We say that the web server has a special folder, and I would like to mention that a web server don't confuse it with a hardware server. There is a hardware server, yes. The server, the files have to be stored on a hardware server that has a CPU and disk, but also the web server is a software that runs on a port, which we said port 80, and is able to accept requests from the clients or the web clients, like the web browser or other HTTP clients, or the, curl, Postman, all those things are clients that talk to the web server. Any files outside that folder, we talked about it, that the document root is the true folder as far as that web server is concerned. Anything inside there can be seen as long as the permissions do allow. So we talked about the web browser and the web clients. I think we had a chance to say that these things communicate to the server via HTTP. Basically, HTTP is the web pages. The basic thing within the web pages is the hypertext, the HTML files that come with the hypertext. So the HTTP is the protocol of transferring those files. But in addition, HTTP is used to transfer even CSV, CSS, JS, or JavaScript files, PDF, or any other file that you have. We also talked about other clients that are non-browser clients, and we talked about wget, curl, Postman, or any other client that you know out there. As of yesterday, we were able to demonstrate how you can access a website through the browser. You can access the website through wget, or a web page through wget. You can also get a file through curl, and you also saw how you can get the same data using Postman. So today, my focus is on how you can also use another client, which is one system talking to another system. Like if you create a website that has to talk to the backend, then the website that you create must have some HTTP client that is able to send a request to the backend, and the backend will receive the data, do what it is supposed to do, and then give the result back to the client. So today we are going to see another type of client, which will be in form of code that will allow us to connect to the backend. And as part of this, we'll also be able to see such a backend interface, and we can call it an API in this particular case, can be used as a way of giving the work to the server to do the job, and then the server gives you back the response. So I think that is enough for the recap, and we did a bit of coding. But today I want to talk about scripting, because as part of what I have just mentioned, invoking the backend or making a call to the backend through HTTP, you can do that using scripting. Because as we said, websites HTML is not interactive, CSS is not interactive, but JavaScript allows the website to be interactive. And it's programming language that is able to issue commands to talk to another server remotely. So we have JavaScript, which you guys have learned, and JavaScript most of the time runs on the client side. It is executed on the browser. Yesterday, when I sent the data, yesterday when I was showing you guys the demo, one of the things that I noted is that I could do the computations through JavaScript, but some of you might be asking, was the script, the value, the computation of the mathematical computation, was it happening on your browser or was it happening on the web server? And the answer is the script we created, those additions and computations actually happened on your browser. So it's a script that you can look at, but it runs on the client side, and the client in this case is a browser, and it can do 1, 2, 3, 4 because it's using the scripting language JavaScript, which is a programming language that can allow you to do loops, to do anything that you do in any other programming language. So JavaScript, and I said most of the time, JavaScript runs on the client side. JavaScript also runs on the backend. And we also have another thing called PHP, Node.js, and ASP. And sometimes you have Node.js is JavaScript that runs on the backend. And the key idea is that these technologies are called server-side scripting. The difference between client-side and the server-side scripting, at the end of the day, you're computing the VAT. The question is, where is the computation done? For client-side, it's done on the browser using the CPU of your machine. For server-side, it's done on the server using the CPU of the server that is processing your request. And this is something that you need always to remember. And I'll use these bases now to show you how we can create another script that runs on the server. And then the script on the client can actually invoke an API call to the script on the server. So, and this is basically, I'll create a basic API today. I'll use one of the server-side scripting language, which can be used for rapid creation of an API like PHP, and I can use that. It doesn't mean that you guys have to master the PHP. Don't get lost in the details of PHP, but the key idea is that we will use that. So allow me to show you what has been happening as of yesterday. We were able to have the web browser send a request to the web server. And yesterday we saw how the browser gets web pages or a web page or a file via HTTP GET. And when I say HTTP GET, I'm hoping that you remember when we accessed the page through the browser or even curl or any other client that we use, at the end of the day, HTTP request was created. And that HTTP request was supposed to get a file. So when you see the word get, it basically means you're getting the file. So they didn't have to use a different a word that could confuse the user. So when you see a get, you're basically getting the file. So we see how we got the HTML file index.html. We saw how we got the CSS file. We saw how we got the JavaScript file. And then the browser did the magic on the browser to ensure that now we have a web app that is interactive, that you can put your amount and then you get a tax. Now, I want to compare this in the context of an API. Now, in an API setup, before I move to the API setup, I wanted you guys to note that yesterday when we saw the get, and if you didn't see it well, I'll repeat it today at the end of the session so that you can see the recap. But the HTTP body, we said HTTP has 3 parts. It has it has 2 types of messages: a request, HTTP request, and a HTTP response. HTTP request is sent by the client to the server, meaning that you're requesting for something, and then the server serves that request and gives you an answer in the name of a HTTP response. Now, the payload, as of yesterday, if you look at the HTTP body, you saw that actually within the body, we saw the actual HTML code that we wrote. That's what was retrieved. Actual CSS code that we wrote. Actual JavaScript code that we wrote. So the HTTP body had such content that is similar to what we wrote on the clients. Now let's look at APIs. Now, what you're talking about, a web browser in this case, or even a web client, if I could use that, makes a call to a web server. Now, this web server is a special one because we are saying now it has an API. But at the end of it all, it's the browser acting as a HTTP client, makes a HTTP API call on a web server via HTTP post or GET. Sometimes you might want to ask for a list of all the countries from a service that you have created, and you have an API to get all the countries. Still, you can use HTTP GET, but when you go to the server, you don't see a HTML file with all the countries. Maybe it's data being loaded from the DB and you return it in a list of items. And we also sometimes post. And when I say post, it means that you actually push in data. Like when you log in, when you put your username and a password, and the data has to be sent to the server, there we will be using HTTP posts. Now, there is a slight difference in terms of HTTP APIs and the usual HTML GET, CSS GET, JS GET. The payload sometimes of the HTTP body is most of the time in the APIs that I've interacted with, HTTP APIs, in the form of JSON or XML. I know that previously we had a look at how you can get data and the response comes as HTML, but now here we are talking about JSON or XML. At this particular point, I want to take a break and ask the team on the call, in case you're not familiar with JSON or XML, please comment on the chat so that I know whether I need to give some more details on this. Are you familiar? If you're not familiar with JSON or XML in the context of maybe APIs, or you are not familiar with API, JSON, XML, if that thing is new to you, please mention it on the chat so that I can align the next content accordingly. So this is your moment. If you're not familiar with any of API, JSON, XML, okay. JSON, XML is new to me, not familiar with XML, API, JSON, XML. So there is someone who doesn't know all of them. XML is new. I'll just give you guys another few seconds to just confirm. If you're familiar with JSON, also be like Peter M, who has just confessed that he is familiar with JSON. And I'm hoping that Peter, you're familiar with API too. So it appears like yes. Thank you for those who are familiar. It's good. I hope that there is no group that doesn't have anyone who is not familiar with anything. So sometimes you might not discuss the question of API without either talking about JSON or XML when you work with most of the organizations in this country or even in this continent. As long as you're dealing with APIs, if you've never had one of the two, you will hear. Or sometimes you have APIs that are line-based. They don't have, someone just returns data in English. It's not, okay, this is good. I think we can proceed now. I'll move on to the next slide, which is not questions. So I'll move on to a HTTP request that requires us to talk to the server. So I will give you guys an illustration that yesterday, the challenge was the user enters, the user input is basically amount and the rate. The challenge is to compute the VAT. This is the VAT rate, yeah? The challenge is to compute the VAT and the total amount that you'll pay if you went to the supermarket. So here the idea is to just come here and say e.g. 100, and the VAT in Kenya or value added tax is 16% in Kenya. So that's the VAT rate. And the challenge is to compute the tax, which is equivalent to the amount times the rate divided by 100, which gives us, of course, 100 times 16 divided by 100, which gives us, and then the total amount will essentially be the tax plus the amount, which will give us 100, or 16 plus 100, which will give us 116. Now, as of yesterday, we used JS to do the computation. And this was done on our machine, on the client. And that's why we are saying we used client-side scripting. I know sometimes these things you have had them in school. Yeah, so we're assuming that these things are not too new to you. Now, today, we are going to use option 2, where we do the computations on the server, meaning that we'll create a basic API that will receive data from the client, compute, and return the answer. Now, one of the things that I'll do is I will use JSON for those of you. So JSON is something that you can come here, and I think you can come here and you Google JSON tutorial. Now, I will give you guys an example so that you can come and study what JSON is and the JSON tutorials and everything that you have. But JSON stands for, the JSON is under JavaScript. Sorry, I had, yeah. So it's still under JavaScript. JSON, yes, it's here. So it's JavaScript object notation. So for those of you who want to send data, so this stands for JavaScript object notation. Now, don't get confused that JavaScript object notation is used in JavaScript. No. It is an open standard, and other languages support JSON. Standard of putting data together, data into objects. I know some of you are like, what are objects? The objects you know are cats, cows, and all that. So let me give you an example. Now, traditionally, without JSON, without XML, someone would say, I want to send the data in the requests is essentially 2 values, an amount and then the rate. The data in the response is the tax and the total. We already know what those values stand for. Now, someone would come and say, a guy would come here and say, option 1, you come and create a custom way of sending the data to another server. And some of you might, you've heard about data transfer objects, something DTOs and all that. So you're basically trying to transfer data to the server. Now, there are 2 options. Option 1, we can say you always send amount, then you put a pipe, and then you put the rate. This is a crude way of doing it, but it is possible, so that when you're sending the amount, you will say, e.g. 100 pipe, and then you put 16. And of course, the answer will come in the result of, the response is expected to be in the result of maybe the tax, and then pipe the amount. So we expect, e.g., the answer to be in the form of 16 pipe 100, 116, sorry. So that tells you this is the VAT and this is the total amount. This is the amount and this is the right. Now, what happens is this approach, if I created an API like that, it will still work. And I can pass this data in the HTTP request. But now most guys will always be asking you, so what does this guy represent? Sorry, Sheldon, maybe you can mute if you don't mind. Yeah. So option 2 was to be more organized. And this is now where there are guys who came, can we use JSON? And JSON states that you start an object with that, with curly braces, and then you have a tag, key, and value. Maybe here you'll have amount, and then you put colon, and then maybe 10. If it's an integer, you don't need to quote. And then you can go here and you say the rate, and then you send, and 16. Now, this is JSON. Yes, yes.
I think the screen you're presenting is a different one. We can't say what you are coding. You're seeing W3.
Yeah. Let me just see. I'm so sorry. Sorry, guys. So someone needs to note this, then we can do a quick repeat. So what I wanted to say is that, can you see my screen?
Yes, you can see it now.
You can see the VS Code.
Yes.
So let me just scan through, repeat what I had said. The challenge is the user is entering two values, 116. The challenge is to compute the VAT. And this is how you compute the VAT. We used JSON. Previously, we used, in the last example, we used JavaScript to compute, to do the computations on the client. And we called it client side. Now, option 2 is we actually come here and we say this is option 1. And option 2, we do the computations on the server via an API. So we have to create an API on application programming interface, meaning that you as a developer, you can program to send data to that interface, and that interface can give you data. So the question that now comes, since I know the data I want to pass, how do I structure the data? So the question is, how do I send the data and in what format? Now, and that's where now guys came with JSON, which I said it's JavaScript object notation, which is not limited to JavaScript. Even guys who are writing Java APIs, they still use JSON for their own work. But the people who came up with the concept first were the guys who are dealing with JavaScript. And I said there are a number of solutions. Now, the number of solutions, and the number of solutions could be one, we do the hardware and we do a custom and say we will pass the request as amount and rate. But now if you're a developer and you find a request that looks like this, 15, 16, now you will ask yourself, which one is the amount, which one is the rate? And you guys can already see the confusion. This is not a good way to encode or to organize your data in your APIs. Because if you do so, it becomes not human friendly, because I'll have to tell you what the first one means and the second one means. So guys came up with JSON. And JSON, of course, came after XML. XML is older than JSON, but just allow me to use JSON. So JSON, they came up, you create an object and the request will look like this. And the response would look like this. The response would be something like this. And here we can say tax is 16 and total is 116. Or maybe I can use 200 here so that guys don't. So here, this will be 32. And of course, this will be 232. So here we can say this is the request and this is the response. So in our HTTP API, we can decide to encode data into JSON and send it through the network. So that's one option. Now there is another one. You can only find two APIs, most common, XML. So XML works with a different thing. I said HTML, XHTML conforms to XML standard. This is not a lesson on XML, neither is it a lesson on JSON. So I'll be very quick, but I'll give you the key idea so that we can now be able to create our own API. So the request will be something like that. And you close with a request. And then you can come here and you say amount. And you put 100 or 200. And you close the amount and you do that. And then you say rate is 16 and you close the rate is 16. And then the response, as you guys would guess, I know if I told some of you guys to come and type the response for us, you would actually type something that we would all agree. So I can come here and this is the basic idea. XML uses tags, a closing and a opening tag, and then here it will be tags, and you have to close it with tags, and then you have total, then you'll have to close it with. Now, of course, here the tax will be 32 because it's 16% of 200, and the total amount will be 232. So in a nutshell, I've told you that when you are sending data to the server, the most common ways of encoding the data is either XML or the JSON. And I hope you guys will have some intro. The reason why we are doing this is because a lot of information is out there. You can go and read this. So if you want to send an object with 3 fields, you can use such a thing. You can go study everything about all these JSON versus XML, but the power that we are giving you today is to be able to know what JSON is meant to solve, and you can dive deeper and give you the resources so that you can move forward. Now, having said that, the API that I'm going to create will be a HTTP API that is based on JSON. And because of time, I'm not going to create an API afresh. I already had something that I had created that is here on the Natujenge GitHub portal. You can go and look for this project, and I'll just copy this. And now that we have done this stuff together, I know this code will make sense to quite a number of you. So what I'll do is I'll come here and I will create my folder called API. This is not how you do APIs in real life, but it will be enough to do this. So I'll use PHP. Again, this is not a lesson to teach you PHP, but I'll also take you guys through this script because it is simple. If you have done C programming language, PHP, it would not, most of the constants, if, else, or even the Java guys, you will not have a challenge. Actually, most languages, they follow the C syntax for most of their control structures. So what I'll do here is, don't worry, this one gets the HTTP body. So don't worry. So when you send a request and you push data to this one, it will get the HTTP body. This is a bad way, but I'll write it into the server log, into the web server error log. Again, this is not what you do for real life situation. You need to do login nicely. And I'll specify the response header and say that the content type, again, this is HTTP header. Please note the 3 sections of a HTTP response, the response line, the headers, and the body. The body is what we have here. This thing that we created here is what we want to call the body here. The body should be something like this. But now the headers, they are part of the HTTP standard. Now, I come here and I get this. I initialize in PHP. I can do this without saying var or declaring a variable. I can do this. Then I can say if the data is empty, the raw HTML data, actually I should have said raw HTTP body data. So I can come here and say raw HTTP body data, and I can print it here so that we see. Then I can say if it is not null, if it is set, because it can be empty. If you do a get, you don't push any data, as yesterday we saw. Then I can come and do JSON decode. If I do JSON decode, it will convert this XML here, the way we have said it here, into a JSON object or into an object. And I can say the JSON data, then this is how you access the attributes of a JSON object in PHP. So I get the amount, I get the rate, I do the computation, I get the tax, I do the total. Of course, if the data is empty, I just come and do an error log. If there is no data that was sent, the amount and rate will be default to 0. So I'll come here and create the response. So let me call it response here. And I can come here and say the response, I encode it to JSON, then I print, echo is printing. So if I do this and I go back to, I hope there is no one with a question regarding that. So this is a basic API. And this API is based on JSON. So, but now I'll push it and I will push it to the server. I think yesterday I had opened this. So I'll come here and do, this is logging into the server, don't worry. So that's a server. And then I can come here. I don't know whether we have the history command. Sorry, this one is not there. So I can come and say, cut my home folder, documents, my scripts, still 168. And you guys remember this, so we can come here and since I'm on the server, I'll go to the document root where all web pages must be kept. And then we remember our page was within the Natujenge folder, which is still within the document root. It was inside another folder called the CW, then it was inside a folder called demo. And we can see our files there. Now, what I want to do is I want to print the current working directory so that I can transfer my whole scripts to the server. I can come here and I can come here and I can say I'm trying to SCP everything here to root at 51.15.211. Don't abuse this server, though it has doesn't have, and then I will paste there. So I'm copying everything that I have from here into a folder called demo on the web server. That's the SCP process. Since I've created my website, I can come here. And of course, since I don't have the password, I have to specify where the key is. So I can come here and I copy this and I paste, but the key is actually named scaleway.pem. And this scaleway should give us. And then I can do recursive to ensure that I copy even the folders. So if I do that, and we will see even our calculate.php is going to the server, going to the server, going to the server, going to the server. If you look at the time the file was updated, it was updated yesterday based on the timestamp. If I come here, then I'll be able to see that the files have been updated. Though I updated yesterday because I haven't made any changes, but we have the API. If I want to see the file, it's here. Now, technically, for those guys who say they have never, ever interacted with an API, now count yourself lucky today because that's going to change. So I'll go to Postman and I'll open these requests. So I'll come to the server. I know some of you can remember the server now. It's this one. But now we have something that we are calling, I can come here to the server and I do 51 dot, yeah. Then I can do demo. You remember we did this, but now today we are going to use calculate API/API because it's within a folder called API, calculate.php. And you can see the data is coming like this. There was a guy yesterday who said, how is Wireshark and the network tools, do they work the same? Yes, they do the same thing, because here I can come and you can see here, you can see that we have sent a HTTP request. It's a GET. Then, of course, you can see the request headers. And then, of course, if you want to see the response comes like that. And if you want to see the preview, it looks like that. If you want to see the response headers, you can actually see the response headers here. So you can see the content type is application JSON, meaning that the payload, which is here, is actually a JSON response. I hope I'm not confusing someone, but the key idea here is we have created an API. Normally APIs, we don't access them through the browser unless it's a GET API. Here we are accessing through POST. And what I'm going to do is in my my Postman, I'll say I want to post data to this guy and I'll get the response. But I need to type my JSON request and say the amount is 200, comma, according to JSON rules, rate is 16. And if I do the post right now, it gives me that. If you change these to 200, then it gives us that. Up to this point, what we have done is that we have just created an API that runs on HTTP and sends a post request. Now, I will come to Wireshark again because I had done that so that we see the difference. And I'm going to close on this so that I close without saving. And I make another request here. So I just come here and I do that. Now, if you look at the backend here, sorry, I'm using the word backend and it could mean something else. At the back of the postman, you can see the data. I know some of you would be wondering what this A6F for guys who were with us during the previous I don't know whether to call it a boot camp, but the guys who are doing Love the Bytes and did the SS7 challenge, you know that these numbers actually mean something. They're called hex streams because they're hexadecimal numbers, which is a base 16 numbers, and those base 16 numbers is what we use to communicate on the network because it's a digital communication, meaning we must send digits. We can't send hello. We can't send the word post. We have to represent P as a number. So, but the focus today is not that. So I can come here and copy this, and I'll copy this so that you see the request, copy as printable text, and I can come here on my tool here, and I come and say the request so that we also see that's there, the request. And below there, there is a body that is JSON. So I can copy the body again as printable text, and I come and paste here. For those of you who were with us yesterday, you can see that this request conforms to the HTTP standard. The request line, method, which is a post, the resource you're accessing, or the page, or the API, and the version of HTTP. Then after that, key, colon, value, key, colon, value, key, colon, value. Each of them in its own line because they are terminated by /r/n. Then after that, we get an empty space, which is basically /r, carriage return, and new line, or the line feed. And then after that, we get the body. Now, how do you know where the body starts? After the line has ended, the empty line has been reached. Now, one of the things you'll notice that you'll discover that how many characters are these? For those of you who can see on my footer, this is essentially 37 characters, if you can look at this thing. So if you look here, you'll see the content length is 37. So how browsers work is that they read the first line, they look for the termination, which is the new line and the carriage return. They start reading each header, reading each header, reading each header until they get to the point where they see an empty line. Then they know what the end of the header is here. Now they have to read the body. Do you know how many characters are there in the body? You have to look for this number. And if it is 37, you start counting 37 characters up to there. After you read 37 characters, you have finished reading the HTTP request. Why are we doing this? Because sometimes you could have one network call that has multiple requests in one. So we must know that after 37, this request is done. Now, Robert Gidenji, you can mute if you don't mind. Then we can go now to the response. I'll come here and I will come and copy and the printable text. And then I can come here and put that. Sorry, I should not enter a new line because the new lines are part of the request. And then I can come here and copy printable text, the body, which is using JSON, application JSON, and then you can have that. Take note that this guy gives us the tax as 320, the total as that. And if you count the number of characters, they are 24. Content length must be 24. There is no requirement as far as HTTP is concerned. The order of the headers could appear in any way. So sometimes the content length could be at the bottom, but as long as the key says content hyphen length in that case, then you read 24 and you know, I'll just read 24 bytes after the empty space is delivered to me. So essentially you can see now a HTTP request in action and a HTTP response in action. And I don't know whether there is anyone with a question up to that point. Request has request line, headers, body. Response has response line, headers, body. And the request line has what you want, the resource you want, and the version. This one starts with the version, HTTP code, and HTTP code or status description. This is the status. So 200, I know some of you already know 200 is everything was okay. I know another one that you could be familiar with, 404. If let's say, for example, I come here and post this request here on this one, but I just change the script to this and I post. Of course, that doesn't exist. It gives me 404. If you come here, you'll see the request is being sent. But this is the response. If I copy this guy and I paste here, 404 means the page has not been found. If I come here, I'll get that one. And then, of course, I'll come and get I'll come and get the XML, and I have that. So essentially, what is returned, you are requesting for a certain page. Maybe I can come here and copy this so that you see. And I hope some of you will get a light bulb moment when you see this thing. Yep. So you can see we sent a request to a resource that does not exist. And the server responded then by saying that, you know, you're requesting for a page that is not found. And we got 404. The web server, which is Apache, went ahead and gave us some content to display to the user. So essentially, if I pick this URL and I go access it on my browser, and I come and type it there, this content I see here, if I come here and inspect or view page source, you can see it's the same data that we got via the response. So in other words, we are asking for something in JSON. We got a 404 and a default page to display the user and tell them, oops, something wrong happened. This one is the default 404 page for Apache, but some people create an exciting 404 page that can lead you to something else. Sorry, what you're looking for doesn't exist, but do you mind checking 1, 2, 3? So that content is normally returned in this 404 request. I don't know whether there is anyone who would like to ask a question regarding this thing, and you can send it on the chat. Yes. Yes.
In the last request you made,
the 404.
Yes.
Yes.
On the terminal.
Yes.
Can you go back to the terminal where you are pasting the request?
Yeah, it is. It's here.
I can see the content length is 235, but when you highlight it, it is 234. There is a reason why.
Meaning the content length is 230. Let me just check. Now, sometimes you could avoid copying a space, but I'll also mention one thing. And my brother, thank you for asking that. Sorry, I can come here and I'll copy this one as hex string. Let me show you something, Shuri. And thank you for asking that question. If I highlight this, for those guys, this is now, sorry. Am I highlighting in the correct? No, I'm highlighting in the wrong file. So let me come here and highlight this, the 7 lines. That's what. So I'll come here and copy. Instead of copying text, I copy as hex string. A hex string is basically, yeah, and then I can do word drop so that I can highlight everything. Take a note, my brother. Here you can see it's 470 nibbles. I know this is confusing someone, but just think of a nibble. 2 nibbles is 1 byte. Is that okay, guys? So a nibble, so you can consider that this is 470 nibbles, characters. Those are hexadecimal numbers, but this is exactly 235 bytes. Now, the length is in bytes. Now, there is one thing I'll tell you, that it doesn't mean that one character, if you use an character encoding system, and I will not dive so much into this, my brother, was it what? It was Shuri.
Yes, it's Shuri.
Yes, I will not dive into this so much, but the character encoding might answer this. So in character encoding, if you use ASCII, extended ASCII, I think I said A has to be given a number, B has to be given a number, because the network does not understand these things. So if I use ASCII, one character is represented as 1 byte in extended ASCII. If I use UTF-8, and this lesson is not about that, But the point I'm trying to make is that one character can be represented as 1 byte in UTF-8 or 2 bytes, or you can go all the way to 8 bytes, depending on, I'm not sure whether it's 8 or 4 bytes. I think it's 8 bytes in UTF. Now, what essentially we are telling you is that in this request, there could be 2 possibilities. That there is a character that requires 2 bytes to represent, or there is an empty space that I didn't copy. So that's what I would say. But this guy specifies the number of bytes you have to count from the time you experience the white space or the empty line. So you have to count that. And I'm quite excited to see one of you being very curious. Yes. So in character, in ISO 89, I think the content type is ISO 8859.1. You can go look for this and tell us which character here takes 2 bytes, because that's the only thing that I can use to explain. This is advanced stuff. Please, you can ignore this thing just in case you're confused. There is a separate video on character encoding, which we can share with you guys. It's on our YouTube channel, and you can go on Natujenge, look for something, and maybe it might help you understand what you're talking about. Unicode, UTF-8, ASCII. I know some of you in school learned BCD, EBCDIC. All those things are ways of telling the computer how to represent a character into a numeric format, because digital communication says that we must send the data in 1s and 0s. And those 1s and 0s are actually numbers. So we never send H. And I think on our YouTube channel, there is a Love the Byte series, which you can spare some time and you'll get some good value if you watch that, especially if you feel like you are interested in learning this. You don't need to know all that as a web developer. It's always good to appreciate, but you must not get confused in getting all those things. Now, that tells you something. So we have been able, I don't know whether there is anyone with a question. Marlin, you can keep checking out. Shuri, have I helped you a bit?
Yes, you helped me a lot.
So I need you to go and find the answer to this question. The URL is there. Go research, copy all these characters. Tell us which one here is not represented as, or is there anything we are not seeing with our naked eyes? Because there could be a new line.
Okay, we'll do.
Yeah, sometimes you don't have data that you're not seeing with your naked eyes. But I want you to evaluate and tell us which character is represented as 2 bytes. And you can do this by clicking on each. Like you can come here and click on 3. See, it's the angle bracket. 21 is the question mark. 44 is, I hope you're seeing, guys, this thing that is highlighting. So you can go there and you can tell us out of these 200 and because we have already confirmed that these are, sorry, these ones are, the line-based, these are how many bytes? We've already confirmed the how many bytes. I think it's calculating, but you can go click on each of them until you get to the point where you can see each line, like this line is that line is that line is that. You can tell us which character has 2 bytes. Or actually, it could be this new line that we are not seeing, my brother. Go calculate, tell us which character we are not seeing, because here you can see that. Sure, that's okay, huh? Yeah. Okay, so let me move now to the last part. Whoa, my timekeeping skills are under test. I hope you guys will allow me just to do one thing. And then later, when you guys are doing APIs, I would like to go now and study HTTP RFC with you guys. It's already in the document that I shared, but this guy called Tim Berners-Lee, working for World Wide Web Consortium, and MIT, in June 99, created the version we call HTTP version 1.1. This document is in the presentation. This guy didn't work on it alone. He worked on it with guys from Microsoft, another guy from World Wide Web Consortium, Compaq, Gettys or something. So all these guys are different humans that worked on this standard that we call HTTP today. This document is not long. It's just about maybe 176 pages. You just need to read about 40 and you'll be able to see how everything works. So you can come and see the request has a request line. The request line has the method, request URI, and it also has the version, has a status line, which has the code and the reason phrase. And then you can go and see what a HTTP body is. When you get HTTP error code statuses can be 100, continue 200, okay, 2XX successful, 3XX redirection. If you have ever gotten to a website, you click bit.ly URL, then you're taken to another one. They use 302, found, or 301, moved permanently. But for these guys, they use 302 to redirect. And you pass a certain header parameter, which we'll talk about later. Then you have client errors. If you have an issue yourself, like you sent data in the wrong way, instead of putting data in the correct format, we get all these errors. Or you try to access a URL that you're never authorized. Anything 400, it's you, the developer, who has a problem. Server error means that the server has an issue, 500, and the brothers that support that. So these things are here. And this document is accessible to everyone. It's on the PPT and under references, and you're going to look at it. One day after you guys look at it, I'll do another session where we can now demystify HTTP in details. So you'll be able to get all these things on this document. If you don't have this document, please ensure that you get it, but I can also share it on the chat to ensure that everyone is on the same page. So I don't know whether you guys will allow me to just make an API call to our API using JavaScript. Can I do that? Then we end there.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Now seeing a HTTP client that is not curl, that is not Postman, that is not wget, that is not web browser, and that is not probably what you use. So we are going to use a client that can allow us to write code to send that data. So I will not assume that I am the guy who knows everything. So these tutorials are here. If you don't know HTML, I can copy these and you can read all these things and you can get all the details. CSS do the same. The challenge in this week is to ensure, please spare time and read these things. Even if you believe in Bootstrap, material design, what, please read these things because they will also help you see some elements that you have always ignored, and you will just discover that the power is within yourself. You just need to unlock it. You need to understand what everything is trying to solve. Don't tell us that we are having a web server. You need to know what a web server, what problem was it solving. So I'll come to JavaScript because we know CSS cannot make an API call, HTML can't, JavaScript can. And we are going to write a client-side script that will invoke our server-side script, the PHP script. The computations happen on the backend, but we want the front end to talk to the backend. So if you can think of building an app, whether it's a web app, an Android app, the concepts are the same. You have gotten user data from an input form, and you want to send it to the backend, and the API you want to use is HTTP. And maybe just some spoiler alert, not all APIs are HTTP based. Ask those who work in telecommunication. There are some APIs that don't ride on HTTP. So I'm going to come here and I'll use something called the Java AJAX, which is, if you guys are using, HTTP clients in your own library that you love, AJAX is the developer's dream because you can read data from a web server after the page has loaded, update the web page without reloading the page. You can send data to a web server in the background. So we're going to use AJAX to do that. And what it means is that you can actually click this and it changes the content. It makes our website very exciting by loading something on the backend. But for me, I'm interested in this guy. So we want to send data to our API, and we want to use XML HTTP request object, and we are going to create an object, and that object, you create it like this. So you come and create an object, and then after that, you can define a callback. When you make an API call, when the data comes back, you invoke this function, it's a callback. And then after that, you can do send. How you do send, you specify the method, and then you specify the URL. But if you want to send via post, let's see what you can do. So if you want to send and you send a body, then you're going to do this. So I'm going to use this page to actually create an API call to our server. And what I'll do is I'll go to the thing that we did the other time. So allow me to just open our index.html. And here we said calculate local, and I will say calculate remote. So I want to say this calculation will be done remote. I hope I've not lost anyone. Remote means that we will pass the data to a server. The server will do the computations, give us data back, and then we use that data now to render the page. So this is the only thing we are going to change. So I'll come here to the JS script because functions are defined within JS, and we have already included our main.js file into this HTML file. So technically speaking, everything that is within that file will be copied here. That's technically speaking, that whatever you write here, you can assume it is here. And technically speaking, whatever is inside here, you can assume it's here also. So by including a file means that we are copying the content into this. The browser is able to combine everything together and see one document called index.html that has both JavaScript, CSS, and everything that you need. So the browser has to do that. Now, because we have already said that, I don't want to overemphasize on what you already know. So I'll come here and I'll copy this guy who we said is the function called calculate local, and I'll come here and I'll calculate remote. That's it. So we can say calculate remote invoked. So this code is there. I get the amount the same way, I get the rate the same way. I do instead of doing the computations here, what do? We create a request. So I'll come here and I'll say, let the request be, I want to just use, I had done this earlier, and as I said earlier, I'm not a JavaScript developer, but I know the little to make you appreciate what JavaScript does. So I had created backend calc. So what I can do is I can come and create, yes, this is what I wanted to do. And then I stringify, and then I call that, and I come and call this. So don't worry. So I'll copy this. I'll make sense to each and every request. So here I have the requests. I put it as empty. Then I say request.this. This is, we are using JSON here, or JavaScript objects. Now, I come and create this. The amount, I put the amount there. So you can think of it as an attribute. A student has an age of 17. The request has an amount of this and this. And then I come and say JSON.stringify. This is the guy who converts it into a JSON string. So this is a JSON object. And here it's a JSON string, which will look like, those and etc. Again, JSON is a solution to us avoiding sending the amount with a pipe and then the rate. And then on the back end, you just pick the first part, you split by pipe, then you pick the first. No. That's messy. You don't do it, you do JSON. Of course, some of you are thinking JSON is a solution to everything. Both, it has a lot of major issues that you need to appreciate. Now, what we will do is we have a JSON request here, and we are going to call the API. But if I come here on my index.html file, I have a folder. Remember we said, although the file is in this JS folder, we can assume the content is copied here. So in the index, the API in relative to index.html is actually inside a folder called API. So I have a folder called API, and then a file called calculate.php, then I call that. Now, one of the things that I'll say is some of you might actually come and replace this with a full URL. Yes, it's possible for you to come and replace it with a full URL, and you say Natujenge, whatever, everything. But that's not what we do, because if you do that, then if the IP changes, you have to come and change the source code. So we say this and this. If the index file was loaded from a specific server, then JavaScript assumes that it will use the same origin. Where I've introduced a new thing, it will use the same origin is same as the index.html file. Meaning that the path is similar, but change add/API/calculate.php. So in other words, in English, what it means is if I am here and this is index.html, so it assumes that inside here, if I make an API call and I send it to API/calculate, so it will just replace this and put API/calculate, which all of you know that it actually gives us the correct endpoint. I hope that makes sense. Someone might be asking, why are you not providing the full URL just like you're providing on Postman? No, because this file and this file are on the same host and they're on the same folder, and we can assume that even the API is on the same folder as index.html. So you don't need to specify. The browsers have an intelligent way of interpreting that for us. Now, we have seen that. Of course, we are calling a method called send that takes into parameter the URL and the request. But where is it? We have to create it. Some of you are like, yeah, send comes with JavaScript. No. So the first part will be URL and the last part will be the request. And what we do is now, this is where we come and use our knowledge from JavaScript here. We don't need to know everything. I know most of you write your code by copying so many things on the internet. I'm going to do the same in solidarity. So I will also come here and I will come and I will copy this guy here. So I'll come and copy this code here because I really appreciate respecting what you do. So define the callback. So we come and create our, let's call it HTTP client, because we now know that this is a client, and then we come and say on load, and then we say open, and then we say these. Now here we are going to use post, and we are going to pass the URL. And then we are going to pass the request to be sent like this. Why am I passing it like that? Because the API says that if you do send and you pass a string, this sends the request to the server used for post request. And that's exactly what we want. Yep. So yeah, relative URL. Bonambidi, thank you so much. That's what I was trying to say in many words. And I really appreciate the fact that you have helped us in answering that. So once I do that, on the callback, so here I've created a client. I've configured the callback. This is where you can use the data. So here, inside here, we need to pick the response. And guess what? This response, and then we use it to affect our page. So the difference between this guy and this guy is the fact between local and remote is that the remote one is actually calling an API on the back end. And now we can say an API is a thing that can receive data, handle it, and process. Like you want to withdraw money, just say how much, and you say another parameters, and the server will check your security concerns and it will fulfill it. So I'll still go back to the callback that I had created here, and I will say here I console, I log, and then I come here, and I come here, and I will come here, and I'll put this logic here. So essentially what is happening is that when you read the function, when this HTTP client gets the data, you can get the text, the response text, and this is essentially the HTTP body. In JSON string, we know it's in JSON string because we know the server returns JSON. If it was XML, it would be in XML. And what we do is we now pass. Remember here we did stringify, converting the JSON object into a JSON string. So here we want to do the reverse. We've gotten back the response, and I will log it so that you guys can see. Then we pass it, it becomes an object. And objects, how do you access attributes on an object? Using dot in Java. Don't confuse it with PHP that uses the way we access stuff in other languages, object-oriented languages. So here we use dot to access the attributes of an object. So here we are going to access the tags, we access the total, then we come here and say inner HTML, I think just like the way we had done here in the local. So we can come and say inner HTML or inner text. So here I'm going to use inner text, and we are going to say that the tags is this, or maybe I can say inner HTML so that this becomes a whole p tags. You can see these are paragraph tags is that, total is that. So this, and we can come here and say that this is remote. Maybe here I can come and say heading 2, and then I can say heading 2. This is response from remote. And then of course, those of you who know HTML, that works fine for us. Now, because I have done that, and I believe in the accuracy of my code, I'll just push. I've already done that. Now, if you come here and I'll open Wireshark again, then we see the events of what happens on the background. Now, I will come here and I just do enter. And by now, you guys have seen that we have HTTP. Brothers and sisters, you can see now here, instead of 200, we got 304. And it's because the server told the client that this file has not changed. So use what you had earlier. So to save on performance on the internet, HTTP has something called caching. And that document that I gave you here has actually caching, and caching in HTTP. So if you want to know what caching is and what the browsers do to save the file, because if you access our website now, if you access it 2 minutes later, we don't need to download the same file. If it has not been changed, just allow it to use what you have. And that's why you're being told not modify. 304, which is a redirect. We are redirecting you to use your local copy, which you had cached earlier. All browsers must follow the rules, and that's the book that is called HTTP that defines that. But now the key interesting thing is here, I want to come and inspect the network. And of course, this is where the magic happens. And as I inspect, we will come here and put 3000 so that you don't assume that I have hard coded something. And we are going to calculate. But as we calculate, we can see that on the network, we got a what? A payload of amount 3016 that was sent to our API. For those of you who are using relative, you can see, and you can see we got a 200 OK. The headers are there. And if you want to see the response, it's there. So even if you don't have Wireshark, you can still see some of the stuff here. But Wireshark gives you more power because you can see many other things. So you can come here and see that we got a request, and this thing was 3016, and then we got a response that was in this format. One of the things that you'll notice is that here we are being, the figures are being decoded nicely because in our header, we already told this guy that the content type is JSON. So even Wireshark knows how to interpret JSON request and show you them nicely, that the value is 3480 and the tax is this. But if you look at the actual raw payload that was sent, if I can come here and click on it, you can see it here. It has the JSON standards, the curly braces, the key value, key value, key value, key value. And that basically shows you how we were able to talk to the web server through another client, which is our JavaScript client. And that makes our page very exciting. And if you're doing Android development, then probably you need to be able to do the same using a HTTP client that is not this, whatever that I've displayed here. So this one I've used the AJAX client in JavaScript, and most of their libraries behind the scene, whether you're using Angular, React, they also use this thing at the lowest level, only that some of you don't open that code to get it. So the work of HTTP clients is to send a HTTP request. Now, the good thing about this client, it's programmable. So you can program it as a developer and you can generate a HTTP request. You can see the body for some of you. You can see our JSON data was actually in the body. Mount this. And if I come here on the console, you'll also be able to see what was happening. So let me see on the console what happened. So let me just clear console. And then I come here and I ask this guy to compute And now, because I know some of you might think I've hard coded this, because some of you have little faith, now you can see what happens. So you can see even the amount, the JSON requests and the response, how it is. We are calling remote and we have invoked. If you want to be very sure, yes, you can see on the network, we actually sent a request to the network. Any question? Close the H2 tag. Close the H2 tag. My brother, thank you so much, Michael Kamau. And this is why we have you guys. It was a trick question. Sorry, let me not lie. It was a mistake. So let me just go here and upload the same files. Doing this. As I conclude, I want you guys to tell me if there is an area where you feel like I have confused you a bit, or an area where you feel like I need to put some more focus. I know some of you might have connected everything. Those who have not connected everything, I'm happy to do another session. For the 10 weeks, I'm at your service. 8 and maximum 10 weeks, I'm at your service to ensure that you don't just become a developer, but you become a good engineer. And what we are doing now has nothing to do, it's still developing. The engineering space we are yet to start, which is, I normally argue, is 20% of code, 20% is of engineering is writing code. So what is that 80% that some of you have been ignoring? And I need to make you guys adopt the good manners. Okay, yeah. So one of the things that you'll note, and I know some of you have, very nice JavaScript. Sometimes you can do a CSS that shows loading because you're going to the network, because sometimes you can click and the users are like, what's happening? Because the network is slow. So with JavaScript, you can also manipulate the divs or the HTML elements to show maybe a rotating thing, and you can ensure that once you get a callback, actually, let me just show you something exciting, I will just modify that. And if anyone with a question, please ask. One of the things that I'll do here is when you this, before anything, I can come here and say on click. When you click, I come here and clear and say loading. Please wait. And then after that, of course, the loading please wait will disappear and we'll get the request. So let me just push this just to make it exciting, because JavaScript allows us to give a good experience. CSS allows us to give, and HTML allows us to do a good UI. So we are getting into the UI UX conversation, and JavaScript is at the central of UX as far as web is concerned. So I can come here, and I hope the file has been loaded afresh because it was modified. If I come here and I put, now we are trying to see magic of loading, and I hope my network will be slightly slow so that we load in, please wait. Thank you. So you can see how JavaScript can be used to do something nice. You can also hide a div and change the CSS class. If you want to do that, just go here and study this JavaScript thing, yeah? Yes, go and study this JavaScript thing, work on it, ensure that you study it. And once you do this, even if you are supposed to do TypeScript with Wesley and the team, it will make a lot of sense when you're doing TypeScript. Yeah, don't say you're a Java guy, I'm a Java guy, but I have to appreciate what JavaScript does. So if you're saying you're a Java guy, you don't do JavaScript, please see me after this. Yeah. So that's it. And I think I've come to the end of my demo. Definitely there is a lot. The team Berners-Lee and the gang wrote these things in many months. The content is quite a lot, but my work is to give you the pointers so that you can go and read. Normally, we are told that once we graduate, we are given the power to read, and that is the case. And even as what you're doing right now is just to point you to a new thing called XML, and your work is to go read. XML looks like HTML, or I can say XHTML conforms to the XML rules. Yes, but in a nutshell, it's basically having data using tags, and they are hierarchical. So you can have a tree, just like there you have HTML header, head or body, and then within body you have the p tags. Everything you have to open and close. Those rules have to be applied. Yeah. Any question? Please comment on the chat. Now, do you guys, those guys who didn't know what JSON is, what API is, what XML is, do you have an idea now? Please comment just to encourage some of us so that we keep doing the hard work. If there is an area where you'd like us to revisit, you can mention on the chat, and probably when we are doing another session on HTTP, I will come back and reference this. Why am I doing HTTP? Because the moment you start talking about billing systems, HTTPs are the core. When you're talking about API security, if you do not understand what headers are, then we'll have a lot of challenges. If you don't, how do you secure your APIs? How do you ensure that your APIs are authenticated? So this is the foundational knowledge that you need to have. And if you have not understood something, please take time to tell us on Slack, and I'll be there to help. I can accommodate all the questions from everyone, then we can do a Q&A, or I can use the questions to do another session that just enriches onto what we have started. So thank you very much, and I hope that you guys have benefited. Please, questions or even comments if you guys have something.